Alright, what's going on YouTube? It's DevCon TCG, and I'm here with another video showcasing the Garchomp deck I played to this week's locals, and I wanted to try a couple different funny things with this Garchomp deck. One, I wanted to include some capacity of Judge, because this deck has a really high opportunity to see cards with Corkscrew Drive, being Garchomp's first attack for 100 damage, which allows you to draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. So something like Judge isn't very detrimental for you to play, because by the end of the turn, you'll be able to get a bunch of cards into your hand. So you Judge, even if you're not able to play any of those 4 cards, you can Corkscrew Drive, and then draw 2 cards, and then usually you get a prize card out of it, because Garchomp is doing a lot of damage with that first attack. So a lot of the times you can end the turn with 7 cards in your hand, even after a Judge. So I want to include some copies of that and the Unfair Stamp. So with this version of Garchomp, we're going to be constantly disrupting our opponent's hand, and that's kind of what I wanted to try. I also have the inclusion of the Genesect with the Ace Nullifier here. So, if you're unfamiliar, the Ace Nullifier ability says that if there's a tool attached to Genesect, then your opponent cannot play an Ace Spec card. So, this can help us against a lot of the different decks. So, something like Dragapult wouldn't be able to play their Ace Spec, and they're kind of playing all of them right now. We see Stamp, we see Neo Upper, we see Cape. It really could be anything. And then every deck wants to play their Ace Spec, so being able to take that away from them at any point in the game is very strong. Especially because we have 4 copies of Poké Pad. I don't know why it's split up the rarities here, but there is a lot of opportunity to see Genesect. And with 5 tools in the deck, with Cynthia'S Power Weight and Air Balloon, it's not that crazy to be able to get Genesect down early. Especially against the Terra decks, it can prevent you from getting Water Pond as easily if your opponent doesn't expect the Genesect. And then just opposing Unfair Stamp is really good to not be able to get hit. And then things like Scoop Up Cyclone, we've seen that in Zoroark. And you can avoid your opponent healing one of their Pokemon with that. So you're able to take the prize map a little bit easier there. So the upside of Garchomp in this format is that you have the Gabite with the Champion's Call ability, which is once per turn you can search your deck for a Cynthia'S Pokemon to add it to your hand. So you can use Gabite to search another copy of Gabite, search another copy of Gabite, and then Gabite gets another one of your guys. So the deck is insanely consistent, especially into the item lock, which is going to be what Dragapult's main game plan is going to be turn 1. Something like Hilda can just get you like the Rocky Energy plus a Gabite, and then it pretty much unlocks your whole deck. So the deck is insanely consistent, while Garchomp might be a little bit underpowered as far as the attack goes. I mean, Corkscrew Drive is like a fine attack, especially against one prizer decks. It's going to constantly refill your hand. The Draconic Buster, when paired with Roserade, is a pretty solid attack, although you do have to get rid of both of your energy for it. So if this deck was able to play something a little bit more consistent, where you were able to play something like the Barbaracle, I think it could be a cool inclusion. Not really sure where you'd find the room for it. I mean, there's the Genesect and maybe an Air Balloon. It could be like a 1-1, and then you'd play like more basic fightings. But Rock Energy is really good into Dragapult, as you can prevent them from putting Phantom Dive damage counters onto your board, which is really nice. And yeah, the deck's very solid. The Roserade allows you to do 30 extra damage with all of your attacks, so you can pack a good punch there. The Spiritomb, surprisingly useful. A lot of players are either forced to play into it or kind of can forget about it. So the Spiritomb can kind of come in and do a lot of damage. And the rest of the deck is pretty self-explanatory. We just have the best support in the game, Lillies, a couple bosses, a couple Hildas, consistency. We have 4 Poffin, 4 Gong, 4 Pad, which is a big plus that this deck gets to do, is just play every consistency card. And then 2 copies of Stretcher, 2 Premium Power Pro. I have seen cards or lists go around with this deck that do not play the Night Stretcher, but I'm a fan of Night Stretcher just in case you copy, or in case you prize a copy of Gible or a copy of Roselia. You can also rebench Genesect if your opponent happens to KO it. Also, if you attack with Spiritomb and then they KO it, that means you still have all of your damage counters on your board most likely. You can Stretcher for the Spiritomb again, attack with that bad boy again, and then keep it moving. So, the 2 Premium Power Pro also can help you over the hill against some of the bigger Pokemon in the game as well. And then Cynthia'S Power Weight is probably the craziest part about this deck. It gives you plus 7 HP to any of your Cynthia'S Pokemon. So you put on a Gabite, it's 170 HP, which is pretty comparable to a lot of the basic EX Pokemon we currently have in the game. And the Dragon Slayers can do a lot of damage with the combination of Premium Power Pros and the Roserades as well. So I wanted to include the Air Balloons as well, because we have the Roserade, which can get stuck in the active, and then Genesect as well. But I could see the Air Balloon being a copy of Switch as well. I've kind of gone back and forth on that. So without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, going into round one, game one of the TGS Sunday Locals, we have a Garchomp mirror match. So, my opponent's going to open here with a Pokegear to grab a Lily's Determination for the following turn, and then a Poké Pad as well to play the Gible, which lets me know that my opponent probably has an out to Gabite in the hand. Otherwise, they probably would have held that Poké Pad. Now, winning the die roll in the Garchomp mirror is very important. You're able to usually get the first KO, especially with the Gible lead. And that's very important because removing any amount of Gibles and or Roselias from your opponent's board is very strong. But I opened a really insane hand here as I open triple Fighting Gong plus a copy of Buddy Poff, and then I followed up with the Judge, and Judge is very good here. I had the thought at some point to playing a Badoo, which is kind of specifically for the mirror, but it can also be useful against other decks. It's Badoo, right? And in the mirror match, if you're able to just set up a copy of Badoo here, right? Let's say this Poké Pad gets Badoo. I retreat into Badoo and Itchy Paw on this Gible. It doesn't let my opponent KO one of my Gibles, which is pretty important. But then also, if my opponent has an item-based search card to find their Gabite, they wouldn't be able to play it. So it could potentially let me get that turn ahead, which I think is really the only way to get ahead in the mirror match. Or if your opponent it whiffs boss later in the game, so that once you switch your active Garchomp with damage to one of your bench Garchomps with damage, then they cannot KO you. So yeah, if they whiff boss, it's probably fine. So here, I'm just going to pass on my board here, and we'll see a Gabite out of the hand. So I guess if I did have the Badoo, it wouldn't have mattered. So we see the Gabite here, and it's going to be able to get a copy of Gabite, and Gabite is going to get a copy of Roselia. So, or Roserade, that is the big one. So now that Dragon Slice is going to be doing 70 damage here, and it'll be able to KO my active Gible, which is pretty unfortunate. The nice thing here is my board is significantly better than my opponent's. And we see a Lillie here, so yeah, I judge my opponent to a pretty solid hand, so I can't really... Judge is not really doing his job. So my opponent's going to draw a brand new 8 cards here. And we see the Unfair Stamp in our opponent's hand as well. There's a copy of Fighting Gong. More than likely, this is either going to grab... I would probably grab a Gible here. Yeah, that's probably fine. Gible's going to get another guy down, and then that can Gible, or the Gabite on the board currently that is on the bench. We'll probably be able to get a Gabite for next turn, and then that Gabite can search a Roserade to be able to evolve that bench Roselia. But my opponent actually just has the Force of Vitality straight up, so they should be able to evolve that straight up, and then, yeah, my Gible's going to get KO'd. And I get a pretty solid start here as well. I get to go over the Lilies, the Genesect, and I get the Gabite plus the Roserade. Now, I get another Gabite off of the Lilies Determination, and I'm going to get a Fighting Gong for another basic fighting energy as well. That's going to go to the bench Gabite to set him up. And then I have Poké Pad here that can grab me another copy of Gabite. And now I just get to thin my deck 3 cards. The power weight's going to go on the Genesect, which is pretty nice, considering my opponent does have that Unfair Stamp in hand. So now I'm not going to get to lose my whole board or my whole hand, which is nice, especially after thinning 3 cards like this out of my deck. And now I can evolve into my Roserade, and I have a 3rd copy of Roserade that can go down on the next turn. But because my opponent already has a Gabite in hand, and they have 2 copies of the Cynthia'S Roserade, they will be able to KO me with another copy of Roserade if it hits the board. So I didn't feel like it was necessary for Cynthia'S Power Weight to be attached to the active. See a Night Stretcher here for the fighting energy to go on the Gabite. And then there's another copy of Fighting Gong. I would have maybe liked to see the Stretcher being used for the Gabite or the Gible, that probably the Gabite that's in the discard pile, because my opponent does have that Stone Energy in their hand. And we'll see what supporter they want to play. And it looks like it's probably just going to be another copy of Lily's Determination. Yep, and there's another copy of Lily's coming down. So this is kind of where it becomes tricky as the Garchomp player that went second. My opponent's going to get to go to an even prize trade here, which is very difficult for me to deal with. So which means on this turn, I'm going to have to probably play a boss's order to be able to KO one of my opponent's Pokemon to be able to stay on that even prize trade as well. The only bad thing about the Genesect that I found is it does eat one of your bench spots. So now on my following turn, I either have a choice to bench a Gible or another copy of Roselia. If my Gabite does go down, only having 2 fighting Pokemon in the Garchomp line in the mirror match can be a little bit suspect. Because if your opponent's playing the Neo Upper version and they just take like back-to-back KOs, that could be rough. And then we'll see another Fighting Gong getting played, the Air Balloon. I think my opponent's just going to thinning cards out of their deck to draw the most amount of cards off this corkscrew drive. But looking at my opponent's board, if I do evolve into a Garchomp next turn, then I can KO my opponent's Garchomp with another Roserade down. My opponent does not have an energy on the board, so I can potentially take a lead here, because if I find a Garchomp and a Boss's Order next turn off of my corkscrew drive, I can go down to that even prize trade where I take 2 prizes on this active Garchomp, go down to 3. Then my opponent has to just attack into my Garchomp, and then on my turn, I Boss's Order one of my opponent's Pokemon, KO it, go down to 2, and then I just need to corkscrew drive my, or not corkscrew drive, I need to, Draconic Buster one of my opponent's 2 prizes to win the game. So yep, and then because of the additional 30 damage here from the Roserade, 30, 60, 90, this Draconic Buster is going to be doing 350 to KO the Garchomp. So thankfully my opponent did not find the Cynthia'S tool to be able to make the Garchomp 400 HP. Otherwise, I would not have been able to get that KO there. All right. So I think I am in the lead now, but the game is still relatively close. We see the Poké Pad for a Spiritomb, and then the Night Stretcher is going to get back another copy of Gible, or Gabite. I don't know why I keep mixing them all up. Gible, Gabite, Garchomp. They're not, the first two ones are pretty similar, but Gabite's, or Garchomp's definitely a little bit different. All right, we see the big boy come down, Big Chomper. And this is where the game is going to get interesting, because if my opponent does have something like a Boss's Order to be able to attack around Garchomp, it's going to mean my opponent's going to need 2 copies of Boss's Order for it to really make a difference. All right, so there's the Boss's Order up on my Roselia, and which is fine, because now on my turn, if I have a Boss's Order, I'm sitting really pretty. I can potentially like Boss's Order up my opponent's Roserade and then KO it. And we see an attachment to a power weight on my bench Gabite, and then I'm going to evolve it. I'm pretty much out of, oh, I see the Unfair Stamp here. I'm pretty much out of Cynthia'S Pokemon on the deck, so not having a Gabite on the board is probably fine here. And I'm going to probably try to play the runaway game here in benching that Spiritomb. I'm going to get to draw 5 cards here. This is going to make so my opponent's probably going to have a weaker turn, but not the weakest turn possible, because they still get the corkscrew drive to refill their hand, but at least it's probably going to make it more difficult for my opponent to find the combo pieces they need on this turn. And I do draw the Boss's Order off of my Unfair Stamp, able to KO Roserade, and now my opponent has to find an energy and a way to get another Roserade down to be able to KO me. Otherwise, I just win, potentially. But unfortunately, I put my opponent into double Cynthia'S power weight with the Unfair Stamp to 2. And then let's see what their last card in their hand is. They're going to Gible or Gabite for Fighting Gong. Fighting Gong's probably going to get attached, or Fighting Gong for basic fighting energy. And I imagine this is going to get attached to the Gabite. Yep, and we're going to see attached to the Gabite. And then a corkscrew drive for 190 to be able to refill the hand. All right, so I play the double power Premium Power Pro. And I am not able to KO. Wait, did I goof here? Okay, so this is 260, 290, 320, 350, 380. And I was not able to get another Roserade down because I only play a 3-3. So if I do use corkscrew drive here, I hit my opponent for 380, and then I think Spiritomb just comes up and KOs me, which is not good. So I'm just gonna waste the most amount of cards possible, because I think I need to just find a Boss's Order on one of these following turns. So yeah, you see I play the Lillie here. I use both of the Premium Power Pros, and I'm just going to try to dig through as much of my deck as possible to make it the most likely to be able to get a Boss's Order off of one of these corkscrew drives. Or is it corkscrew dive? Whatever, it's the same thing. All right, so yeah, I'm going to just smack my opponent for a bunch of damage with my Garchomp. And now, if my opponent smacks into my active Garchomp, they actually just die to the Spiritomb. So it becomes an odd board position for my opponent, because if they don't have a Boss's Order, there's not really a relevant attack to go for here. They could retreat into Spiritomb and then attack into my Garchomp for 220, but then if I have Boss's Order, the game is over. So, but I don't believe that I drew a Boss's Order off of my Lillie's Determination. I believe on this next turn, I play a different supporter, so the game's going to go for at least another turn, but an awkward position for my opponent as well, because they do have 3 prize cards remaining. So even if they did have a Boss's Order here, they would only go to 1, which still would allow me another turn. But if my opponent whiffs a Boss's Order here, then I also just get another turn to do stuff. So Because my opponent played Hilda, I know they're not able to take a KO, and they can't play something like a Prime Catcher because I do have that Genesect in play. I'm going to go for the Poké Pad here just to fail. Play another copies and lose determination. I think I told my opponent after the game, I think off my Lillie, I drew like double Hilda, Lillie, and so I just had a bunch of dead cards in my hand. So here, I'm going to just retreat into Spiritomb, and then this Spiritomb is just going to hit for a bunch of damage. Again, putting one prize in the active is not a huge deal, and because I attacked with the Spiritomb, it makes it so that my opponent should know that I have a boss's order in my hand. And this Spiritomb is going to hit this Garchomp for 330. So now even if my opponent has like retreat into their own Spiritomb, boss's order, kill one of my Garchomps, as long as I keep something with damage in play, like a Garchomp, my Spiritomb can KO this active Garchomp that only has 70 HP left. Also, my Garchomp on the bench can just KO one of my opponent's benched Garchomps with the Corkscrew Drive attack. And then, yep, I just show my opponent the boss's order, and then the game is going to be over. So I go 1-0. All right, now going into round 2, I hit an Eevee Box. Now, I think this matchup is probably terrible for Garchomp, considering that the deck is playing that copy of Leafeon EX, and the only way to KO Leafeon in one hit is with the Corkscrew Drive. And it's pretty difficult to get to that board state while Eevee is putting on a lot of pressure, especially if they can get a turn 2 Flareon attack to power up a Leafeon. It is very unlikely that you're going to be able to get, Garchomp Energy Boss before they're able to just kind of pick off your Gibles with energy. So my opponent here opens with Eevee and double Hoot, and then we see the Buddy Poffin as well. Buddy Poffin is going to grab a copy of Fan Rotom, and maybe we'll see another copy of Hoot, but maybe it is just a Fan Rotom. I know some decks have been opting to play 2 of this Eevee as well, because if you do open that copy of Flareon, you can evolve straight into it turn 1, which is a pretty big advantage. 1, it protects your Eevee from getting KO'd because it only has 50 HP, and also it gives you a Terra Pokemon in play to be able to use with your Noctowl. I have a pretty solid opening turn 1. I get a Roserade, 2 Gibles, or 2 Roselias and 2 Gibles down. Let's see, my opponent has the Lillie's Determination. They evolve straight into Leafeon and then attach to energy, and then I believe that is going to be the rest of the turn. Or we see the Fan Rotom. Fan Rotom is just going to grab probably a Hoot, some copies of Noctowl, and the turn is going to be passed over here. All right, and then, yep, Hoot is going to be bench, and then it's probably going to just be a pass over to me. My opponent's got a pretty beefy hand there, and I'm going to attach Air Balloon, and then I'm reading the guy, and then I go for the Judge. I think this is actually an incorrect play by me. I think I should have attached the Power Weight to the Gible, because then that way, if my opponent has a boss's order plus an energy, it actually does not KO the Gible or the Gabite. Yeah, I drew the Gabite off the first card, which is pretty funny. So yeah, I think it's definitely a misplay here to attach an energy to the non-power weighted Gabite, because now my opponent can KO the Gabite with only 100 HP, but at that 170, I would still have 50 HP left. So on my following turn, I could just promote a Gabite, or promote the Gabite that has the damage on it, and swing into my opponent's Leafeon for 100 damage at least. If I have one copy of Roselia or Roserade, then I can hit for 130, and then on the following turn, if I evolve another Roserade, I hit for 160, which is 190 to be able to KO the Leafeon. And it does take a little bit of effort for the Leafeon player to be able to reestablish a Leafeon, right? They have to use some sort of Crispin, Glass Trumpet, or they have to use their Ace Spec. Now, something for me that could have been useful is if I had drawn the Genesect, I could have actually prevented my opponent from attaching a Crystal here, which means they would have had to use like a Noctowl for a copy of Crispin and just attach the double energy and then KO my Gible the old-fashioned way. This would also mean that my opponent wouldn't get to boss's order my benched Gabite, because they would have to use a Crispin to power up the Leafeon EX here, the active. And we see the boss's order come out from the Jewel Seeker, which is pretty unfortunate, which means my Gabites can be getting KO'd here. So, yep, definitely a misplay here. I should have attached the power weight to the Gabite that had the energy to be able to protect it because there was no way my opponent was going to be able to gust it and attach the necessary energy for Leafeon to KO it. And attacking it for 120 is pretty it doesn't really do enough to be able to worth putting the resources into doing the attack. And yeah, just unfortunate here. My opponent's going to be able to KO my Gabite with energy, which is maybe fine because on my turn I can still potentially attack with a Garchomp. It looks like my hand is Night Stretcher plus Hilda. So at least I'll be able to get into a Garchomp plus an energy and kind of establish my board here. The nice thing is here is my opponent's benched Eevee actually evolved into a Flareon. So I think my opponent's game plan is here is take another KO with the Leafeon and then go into Flareon to power up another copy of Leafeon. And let's see. I'm pretty much just gonna, fill my board up, go Garchomp, attach energy, and then now my opponent's gonna be forced to find another energy, but we'll use a second attack to KO. It's gonna be 160 there, and I'll be able to draw 6 cards to refill my hand. So from a pretty dead board state to now I have 6 cards in my hand, I'm gonna be able to hopefully get into more shenanigans. It looks like I drew a Lillie's Determination off of that as well, and a Buddy Poffin, so I'll be able to see a lot of cards next turn. All right, and my opponent plays the Poké Pad for the Noctowl, and we'll see what this is going to get. If I'm my opponent, I'm probably looking for a Crispin here. Yep, and we see a Terra Orb for another copy of Eevee EX. And now this Eevee EX is going to get a Grass Energy attached to it, and then Leafeon is going to get that final energy to be able to go for the second attack, and that's going to be able to KO my Garchomp here, unfortunately. So a pretty rough position for me. My opponent's going to go up 3 prizes before I take 1. But, you know, it's never over till it's over. I think I top deck a Hilda there. So, yeah, I'm going to attach Rocky Energy to my active. Go for the Buddy-Buddy Poffin to grab a Spiritomb. It looks like that might be the last Pokemon I have left in my deck. Don't have a lot of guys. And then, yep, I'm going to go for the Champion's Call for the Garchomp and play Lillie's Determination. So here I'm looking for a potential Unfair Stamp, which I believe I draw off of this. I'm probably just going to try to waste some more cards out of my hand. Let's see. I actually just played the Unfair Stamp straight up, so maybe there wasn't anything in my hand I could have played. Maybe it's just a bunch of supporters. And then, yeah, I'm going to just tap on my opponent's, and my opponent's going to tap on mine. Go for the Buddy Poffin, just waste that out. And then I'm going to play 2 copies of Poké Pad and a Fighting Gong. Waste all those. I am going to stretch the Fighting Energy because I do want an attachment for next turn. And then I'm going to use the Garchomp to refill my hand and take 2 prizes. So now I'm going to end the turn with 8 cards in my hand, and my opponent is going to start the turn with 3 cards in their hand. They do have the option to use a Noctowl, but with the Fan Rotom promotion, it signifies to me that at least the 2 cards they drew off of the Unfair Stamp, we're not going to let them play the game. So now I have the advantage to come ahead here. If my opponent's not able to evolve this Eevee EX into a Flareon, I'm in a pretty good scenario here. All right, so let's see. The bench Latios is pretty nice here to be able to retreat one of my opponent's Pokemon, and they get the Crispin as well. So we could see this attach 2 energies to the Flareon, and then Flareon can get an attack into the Garchomp to be able to power up the Eevee on the bench. All right, we see the Glass Trumpet come down here as well to be able to attach an energy to Eevee, and then my Garchomp's going to take 130 damage out of its 400 HP, and I am looking for a Gust here. If I'm able to KO his Eevee EX on the bench, I believe the game is relatively over. So yeah, the Eevee is going to come up, and because it is weak to fighting, all I need is the first attack on my Garchomp to be able to do so. And here I'm just going to thin my deck as many cards as I can. Play all those item cards that I'm not going to need anymore. There's Genesect, which is useless now, but I'm going to just bench it to be able to get my opponent to... I'm going to get more cards from my deck off of it, and I'm going to just joke with my opponent like, oh, I wish I had this earlier. You wouldn't have been able to play your Crystal. So this is a pretty rough board state for my opponent. As I have another boss's order, I can use it to KO any of my opponent's Pokemon with another energy because the Draconic Buster is going to do 1 billion damage. And we somehow escape the Eevee matchup, but we go up 2-0 into going into round 3. All right, now going into round 3, I'm going to be playing against a Marnie's Grimsnarl. Now, I don't really know how this matchup is supposed to go. It seems like it could be annoying for the Garchomp player because of the actions of Monkey Dory. You're not really able to KO the Grimsnarl in 1 hit very efficiently, and 2-shotting it is pretty bad because your opponent can just use the Monkey Dory to move a bunch of damage counters over. We see a very solid start from the opponent here, being able to get an Air Balloon Tatsugiri and Marnie's Impidimp and a Lillie's Determination here. All right, so then my opponent's going to draw 8 cards off that, which is incredibly strong, and get an Itchy Pollen off onto me. But the Cynthia'S Garchomp deck is pretty good into item lock, because all it takes is a Gabite to be able to unlock your deck. There's a Dark Energy attached to Monkey Dory, and we see the Spikemouth Gym being able to grab another copy of Impidimp, and then a Poké Pad for a Snorunt as well. So opponents will be able to fill up their board, and it'll go back to me, and it looks like I have a Gabite in hand to be able to evolve my Gible. So there's 20 damage on a Gible, and then, yep, I can evolve. Oh, I actually have double Gabite, which is pretty strong here. And then, yep, I'll be able to get probably just 2 copies of Roselia here. I feel like it's, okay, getting a Gible here is fine as well. But now I'm able to KO the Badoo, and I'm also able to set up my board pretty well. And then, yep, just KO the Badoo. And my opponent's going to go to Tatsugiri, the Frostlass, and then the Unfair Stamp. So, pretty unfortunate I have to lose my hand. But there wasn't really too much going on there to begin with. So, you know, any cards are cards. Plus, I still have that Gabite on the bench to be able to search Cynthia'S Garchomp. So, as long as I draw an energy, I should be fine. And I see a Dark Energy on the Monkey Dory. And then the Stadium is going to grab a Grimsnarl, as my opponent has the rare candy off of the Grimsnarl to be able to power up the Impidimp and the Grimsnarl. So, pretty unfortunate I'm going to be able to lose my Gabite turn 2. I was kind of hoping that my opponent wasn't going to rip the copy of rare candy off of the Unfair Stamp just to give me another turn and to be able to take another KO. I could potentially, you know, Judge or Boss's Order and be able to take another prize card off my opponent. And, yep, my Gabite's going to get KO'd here, unfortunately. And this is kind of where the bad situation is going to start as the Garchomp player, because now it's really awkward for me to smack into my opponent's Grimsnarl here, because now 60 damage is going to come back off of the Monkey Dory. So, especially with how strong of a start that this was for my opponent, it's looking kind of grim already, pun intended, I guess. All right, and then I get another Gabite ability to be able to get Garchomp down, and then I play Poké Pad. Poké Pad is going to grab me just probably another copy of Roselia, maybe. But I'm kind of thinking, okay, if my opponent's be able to move 90 damage onto one of my benched Pokemon with the Monkey Dories, I kind of just have to give him something to sack, because I do have a copy of Power Weight in my hand. But I think this might have to get Roserade. I didn't want to evolve into Roserade straight away because it's going to take those Frostlass ticks. But I do get the Power Weight onto Garchomp, and I'll be able to draw and refill my hand. Hit my opponent for 130 damage. Unfortunately, my opponent is going to be able to heal a lot of this damage off with the Monkey Dory, but there's not really much I can do about that. My Garchomp is going to take a lot of damage here, as well as any of my Pokemon take a lot of damage just from the 180 plus the 2 Monkey Dory ticks. And then there is a Petrel, and Petrel is going to grab a copy of Poké Pad. Not sure. Maybe my opponent's just kind of thinning cards out of their deck here. All right, there's Poké Pad added to the hand. You know, deck thinning is deck winning. And then, yeah, 60 of that damage is going to go back onto the Gabite. And then, yep, everyone's going to take some damage. Grimsnarl's going to go back to 100. Gabite's going to go to 100, and then the Roserade is going to go to 50. So maybe this is where some copies of my own Monkey Dories would be pretty useful. I think if you were to play maybe some Darks and some Energy, some Dark Energy and some Monkey Dories and Garchomp, you'd probably have to play something like Crispin to be able to attach to Monkey, because Garchomp is a deck with no energy acceleration, so it's pretty hard to be able to attach to Garchomp and Monkey Dory. So you'd probably have to commit some amount of Crispins to your deck, and then maybe increase the amount of basic fighting energies that are in your deck as well. So now I can evolve this benched Gabite into a Garchomp, thankfully. So now I won't be able to take the pings on that guy. So at least I can live a little bit longer with him. And I can potentially retreat my active Garchomp into my benched Garchomp. But I think I'll be able to take a KO here. And yeah, I go Boss's Order on my opponent's Morgrim to be able to KO it. I don't know if this is correct to Boss's Order that. I think there might be an argument to KO one of the Monkey Dories or the Frostlass as well. But I think if my opponent has like Monkey plus Energy, it's like the easiest thing to replace considering the deck plays 4 Monkey Dory. So I think the Frostlass may have been correct there. Just to be able to stop my opponent from pinging their own board to get that additional damage onto the board. But, you know, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think it's right to take off that Grimsnarl off the board? Because now it does pressure my opponent. My thought process in the moment was right. My opponent has to bench an Impidimp, and this Impidimp, the only way it can become a Grimsnarl on next turn is if my opponent has a rare candy. But them using Spikemuth for the Morgrem makes me think that they don't have another candy in the hand currently. And there's a Tatsugiri ability to be able to grab Petrol. And I don't know if Petrol is going to be used here. But unfortunately, my Garchomp in the active is going to just take a ton of damage here with the 180 damage from the Grimsnarl. It's going to come out. Plus, my opponent's going to... Okay, so there is the rare candy off of the Petrol. So now, on my turn, the supporter I'd like to have the most is definitely Judge. So we'll see the retreat of the Tatsugiri into the Grimsnarl, and then we'll see Monkey Dory move 3 damage counters off Tatsugiri, and we'll see where they want to put them. My Roserade does have a lot of HP, 200 HP here because of the tool. 3 damage to counters go on to the Garchomp. So my opponent's definitely setting up for a pretty large turn here where they're going to want to KO a lot of Garchomps in a row. But it's pretty difficult because I'm not really able to bench another Gabite without getting a tool, or another Gible without getting a tool down to be able to protect it. And this is something, or a place where something like a Scoop Up Cyclone would be really good. So I had talked with one of my friends about playing just like a heavy Judge Garchomp with Scoop Up Cyclone to be able to heal one of your Garchomps, which would have been really good in this scenario because it would have denied my opponent the prize cards that they wanted to take, as well as healing a Pokemon off my board. So be able, oh, excuse me, that was crazy. Being able to pick up my Cynthia'S tool and then reattach it to a benched Gible is really good. Because even with that third monkey, my opponent can only move 120 damage to it. And then I evolve it into a Gabite. And then, boom, my opponent's not able to KO it. So, here I will have to use a corkscrew dive to be able to KO my opponent's Grimsnarl here. But I think this is where I have a misplay. So looking at this turn, right, I don't have a Cynthia'S tool on my benched Garchomp here, but I do on the active, right? So if I retreat this Garchomp into this Garchomp, attack with this one, if this Garchomp gets KO'd in the active, my opponent can't KO this Garchomp on the bench with double Monkey plus a Grimsnarl attack. So I actually do live with this Garchomp with another turn. It would have an energy on it, and then I can corkscrew drive my opponent's active Grimsnarl for game, assuming they don't have a boss's order. My opponent did tell me that they did have a boss's order in hand because I was thinking about that after the game. So it wouldn't have mattered in the long run, but it was technically the correct play to make. So yeah, making these videos, it is nice because I'm able to kind of go over my own play as well, kind of give myself some self-coaching. But with the third copy of Monkey Dory coming down here, it's just looking really rough. I think maybe in those terms before, my opponent wouldn't have had enough damage to play with here to be able to take a big KO here. So I think it actually was right to KO the Frostlass on one of those previous turns. But I don't know, this matchup seems kind of tough with Garchomp without like a Neo Upper energy. I think Neo Upper definitely would swing the matchup a lot. Being able to probably KO back-to-back Grimsnarls would help a lot. But yeah, this game is looking pretty rough because my Garchomp deck, spoiler, does not play rare candy, as you saw from the start of the video. So we're going to see here if there's anything more I can do. But this game is looking relatively over because my opponent's going to take a big knockout here where they're going to KO both copies of my Garchomp. And I believe the Roselia as well. So they're going to take a 4 prize turn at the very minimum. And then I have nothing on my board that's going to be able to withstand another hit from a Grimsnarl. So the game is pretty much over here. So I'm going to go 2-1 going into the final round. Alright, so I realized halfway through this game that my dumbass didn't hit the record button. But I'm in the final round versus Dragapult. And as you can see, not a lot has really happened. We've just kind of been building up our boards here. This is my opponent's first attack of the game as a Phantom Dive. I believe I bosses ordered or I just probably killed the active with one of my Garchomps, and now we're kind of in this war here where I don't really want to attack the active Dragapult because if my opponent has Monkey Dory plus the Phantom Dive, it is a lot of pressure onto my board. But I kind of have to decide here what is worth KOing. The Dragapult deck just draws so many cards, it's ridiculous. So I can kind of decide, okay, do I want to two-shot this Dragapult or do I want to take away some of my opponent's draw power? So I'm thinking, okay, if I boss up my opponent's Dracloak, it's going to take off that draw power off the board. Because it happens every turn, I believe it's better to KO the Dracloak than it is to KO the Dunsparce, because the Dunsparce leaves the board, so it's not recurring every single turn. And then, boom, I'd be able to kind of prevent my opponent from keeping a big hand, especially because it looks like I have an Unfair Stamp in my hand currently. So if I want to Unfair Stamp my opponent and take away all their draw power, that seems really solid. So I have all of that Gabite on my bench, but it still can potentially get KO'd by my opponent, which is pretty unfortunate. My opponent can take a 3-prize turn with the boss's order next turn. I'm going to boss's order, bring up Dracloak. So you see my Corkscrew Drive would have done 130 here, and then I could KO my opponent next turn with the Draconic Buster. So there's two different ways to go about this turn, I would say. But I want to let me know what you guys think down below. Is it better here to take the two-shot onto my opponent's Cape Dragapult or try to remove one of their drawing Pokemon? And then I know they're going to take a knockout here, at least onto my Gabite, and then I can use Unfair Stamp to reset their hand, and then potentially go for the 2-hit KO and a Dragapult on that turn. But maybe it is stronger to just smack into Dragapult, and even if they do get one Monkey Dory plus Phantom Dive, take a 3-prize turn, then I just promote this Garchomp with an energy, KO my opponent's Dragapult, and then even if my opponent comes up with another Dragapult here from the Dracloak that I didn't KO, then at least I'm somewhat more prepared. It's going to be a little bit harder for them to get Dragapult and energy off of getting Unfair Stamped. So, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. This is what I thought at the moment, what was probably going to be the better play. We see the Dunsparce come down here, and then a Buddy Poffin, I believe my opponent played. So they're going to be able to refill something. Oh, that's a Poké Pad. I'm sorry. That's a Poké Pad for Dracloak. So, you know, I KO'd the Dracloak and it came right back. But, you know, there's nothing really I could do about that. I just kind of had to hope that my opponent didn't have another way to a Dracloak, but it did put me back on an even prize trade, which isn't too bad. But my opponent still has a lot of work to do if they want to KO some Garchomps here. But my opponent does have the way to see 5 cards here with the Dracloak, with the Recon Directive, to be able to get a card out of the deck. And then the Dunsparce can also draw 3 more cards here. If I'm my opponent, I'm definitely looking for an energy card. Oh, okay, so you see the Night Stretcher for the Dreepy, get one of the little guys back. And then an attached to Dracloak. And then we'll see if there's a boss's order here to be able to KO. We do see the boss's order here to be able to bring up my copy of Cynthia'S Garchomp. And then that's going to get KO'd, as well as my benched Gabite. My opponent takes 3 prizes here, which is pretty unfortunate. But the nice thing is here is I do still have my Garchomp, and I will be able to potentially two-shot this active Dragapult, draw for turn, get the Roserade down, boost my Garchomp's damage here, and I get the Poké Pad. Poké Pad can probably just grab me a copy of Gabite, and then Gabite grabs me another guy, so it's a nice little +1 there off of the Poké Pad. So, boom. See the attachment of the Rocky Energy to Gabite, which means now my opponent's active Dragapult cannot place damage counters on my Gabite because of the Rocky Energy. So I'm thinking right here, all right, so I got 30, 60, 90, and with the base of 260, I'm only doing 350, so there's pretty much no way I'm able to KO this Dragapult in one hit. But playing the Premium Power Pro allows me to draw an extra card off of my Corkscrew Drive, potentially. So I can do 190 Dragapults. Even if my opponent heals 30, goes to 160, they still have 260 damage left on them, so I can KO with Corkscrew Drive on the following turn. So that's pretty good for me. Removing this Dragapult is definitely priority number 1, as my opponent is building up another one on the bench, but I can. Okay, so I actually forego the 2-shot KO, and I'm going to go for a boss's order on Dracloak plus the Unfair Stamp. So my opponent does have the Dunsparce on the bench, but this Dracloak I think is a little bit more annoying because it allows him to set up another Dragapult potentially in the future. So I'm going to go for the boss's order here, which is a little awkward because I am going to go down to 3 prize cards, but it is fine. I'm going to draw my 5 cards off of my Unfair Stamp here, and then I'm going to go for the Champion's Call to grab a Roselia out of the deck. I think here it's fine to bench it because my opponent does not have any damage counters on their board to be able to KO it with the Dragapult. All right, and I'm just going to attach a double Air Balloon to the Roselias, fit as many cards from my hand as possible, and then, yeah, I'm going to go for the Corkscrew Drive for the KO, draw some cards, take a prize, refill my hand, and now my opponent has this big Dragapult in the active. See a Dark Energy come down on Monkey Dory, a Dracloak, and a Lillie. So, oh my god, maybe the best Unfair Stamp draw ever. I'm like, bro, Unfair Stamp is such a fake card, bro. But, you know, it is what it is. Sometimes your opponent draws really good off it. Sometimes they don't draw anything off it. And, yeah, that's just Pokemon. So, see the Dracloak, Recon Directive, get a card out of the deck. Goes into my opponent's hand. And then now there is the potential for the Dunsparce to be able to draw some cards as well if my opponent wants to go for that. See the Poké Pad played. And now Poké Pad can potentially grab a non-rule box Pokemon. We can see a copy of Dunsparce here. We actually see the Dunsparce come out. So this makes me think maybe my opponent has a copy of Buddy Poffin in their hand to be able to get a Dunsparce out after this Dunsparce draws 3 cards. This also makes me think my opponent prized a little Dunsparce because otherwise they would have just Poké Padded for the little one. Or they would have played a Buddy Poffin right now to be able to get 2. Which I could also see making sense if they do have a copy of Buddy Poffin in their hand. But if they just had a copy of Poké Pad with no Buddy Poffin, then it makes a little bit less sense to me. See the bench of the Dunsparce. And, yep, see the Phantom Dive come out here. Hit the Garchomp, put 60 on Roselia. So now my Gabite is going to be forced to search a Roserade off of that Roselia. Otherwise, never mind, I just have it in my hand because I'm like that. I evolve into Garchomp, which signifies to me that I'm out of Cynthia'S Pokemon in my deck, and I don't want to be able to get another one. Now, Boss's Order here is really good because I can potentially KO my opponent's Monkey Dory, or I could KO their Dracloak or their Dunsparce, and then potentially 2-shot this Dragapult. If I'm going for the 2-shot Dragapult route, I probably want to KO the Monkey Dory if I do have a Boss's Order here to make it a little bit harder on my opponent. And, okay, I see a Fighting Energy here off of Fighting Gong. And I think I can attach that to potentially the benched Garchomp. And it's going to go on... It could also go on the active, and then I can Retreating Corkscrew Drive with my bench Garchomp. I play the PPP loan, and then I play Judge. I actually don't attach the Fighting Energy, which I don't know if I agree with. I think I still should have attached the Fighting Energy to the active Garchomp. I think my other game plan here was, I was thinking in my head, I was like, okay, maybe I have to save that energy attachment for a Spiritomb if my opponent attacks into my active here. So I'm going to retreat into the Garchomp, but I don't want to bench the Spiritomb next. But looking at my hand, I do have no out to an energy in my hand. So I'm going to play this Buddy Poffin, and I think I'm just going to fail it. So then that way I can thin a card from my hand and draw an extra card with the Corkscrew Drive. I don't have the piece I want in my hand, so I'm going to have to try to draw it off of the Garchomp. I do potentially have some supporters in my hand. Looks like I have a Lillie's Determination. So I'm going to draw a Fighting Energy, but I did not draw an out to the Spiritomb. But the Fighting Energy is the last card I drew, which means I would have drawn it for turn. So, I mean, you can make an argument either way, I guess, that I could potentially have just saved the Buddy Poffin there to get the Spiritomb this turn. But, I don't know, it's interesting. It's like, okay, I'm not holding one of the pieces and I want to draw more cards, so do I take the risk in playing this card? But I can't bench the Spiritomb because my opponent can Monkey Dory plus Phantom Dive KO it. And then I don't know if I have any more Night Stretchers in the deck currently to be able to recur that. So let's see. Basically, I'm kind of hoping my opponent just does not have a Boss's Order, because Boss's Order would be game. If my opponent does not have a Boss's Order, then I can win with my own copy of Boss's Order, which is pretty likely for me to have at this point because I have drawn so many cards of Corkscrew Dive, and I've only used one. I also played the Lillie's Determination last turn to be able to refill my hand. So let's see if my opponent is able to get that boss's order. But it looks like they play a Crispin here, which makes me safe for at least this next turn. So my opponent does have a little bit of worry here, because if I do have a copy of Spiritomb, then my Spiritomb is just going to absolutely destroy this active Dragapult. All right, we see the Munkidori move the Garchomp's the Dragapult's damage a little bit down, and then the Phantom Dive plus the Munkidori is going to be able to KO one of my benched Roserades, and my active Garchomp is going to take a bunch of damage here. And let's see, and I think I top deck the out to the Spiritomb, funnily enough. I think I forgot to put this Roserade in the discard pile. Wait, why did I? Okay, the slight goof here. This Roserade should definitely be in the discard pile. I think I just like put the damage counters on it and then just didn't like my opponent took the prize card and I just didn't take this off the board. I don't think the damage ends up mattering, right? Because I have 360. I have 400 damage on my board. So yeah, this Dragapult just dies to Spiritomb anyway. So the extra damage for the Roserade actually just does not matter. And then even next turn, if I use the 260 attack, I do exactly 320 damage. So I actually do KO either way. So the Roselia math doesn't matter having the additional one. It really just comes down to, does my opponent have a boss's order for game? Play the Buddy Poffin, thin that out of my deck. You know, I don't want to keep that card in my hand if it's dead, if my opponent has like their own Unfair Stamp or like a Judge or something. And yeah, I'm just going to go for the Spiritomb KO onto my opponent's active Dragapult. And the game just comes down here. Does my opponent draw a boss's order? My opponent has a pretty big hand, so I was pretty much just accepting defeat here. And I'm like, it's probably fine. But looking at my opponent, they did not slam the boss's order right away. So maybe I'm in an okay spot here, especially because they don't have any damage to play around with the Munkidori. So my opponent cannot like take 2 prize cards here. Like if they had a boss's order, like I guess if they had a boss order, they win anyway. But right, if they had like some funny shenanigans, be able to KO a Roserade and KO this active Spiritomb. But there's not any at the moment. And there's an Acerola's Mischief. And I believe my opponent used the Acerola Mischief to protect the Munkidori. And they're playing around the boss's order here. Or I'm sorry. They were debating on using it on the benched one or the active. I showed them the boss's order to be able to KO the benched Munkidori because they use it on the active to play around the energy. Because I'm more likely to have an energy here than I have a boss's order. So, yeah, this is just game on my end, having the boss's order to KO the Munkidori. And I'm going to go 3-1 with the Garchomp. And I think this deck has a lot of merit. And I'm a big fan of this deck. I think it's very low maintenance, and the deck is very straightforward. You have a fighting attacker, which is really good because, you know, things like Mega Kangaskhan, you can take easy prizes on. You also have Spiritomb, which can just do a ton of damage out of nowhere. I have seen people also include like a singular Grass Energy to attack with Roserade in case it gets trapped. Not really a fan. If your opponent's got, if you want to stop my Roserade for 7 turns, like let me build up my whole board, bro. Like you got it. But I've also seen Surfer, which I think Surfer can also be good in the spot of Hilda as well. Because, I don't know, Hilda's like fine, but the deck is so insanely consistent that maybe you just don't need it. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you guys want to play the Cynthia'S Garchomp deck, the Garchomp, I'm going to throw the paste bin in the description down below. So thank you guys for watching. Peace. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.